We're all Mavericks.
Welcome to Mamish Mavericks.
With your hosts, Maynard and Tov Breslow.
We're Olim and Gerim.
And we're also entrepreneurs and marketers.
October 7th changed everything,
including the way we do business.
This is the show that realigns your business and goals
with your values and people.
Hey there, everybody. Welcome to Mamish Mavericks. Today we're joined by Zale Tabakman. Zale is the president of Local Grown Salads. Thanks for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm very excited about the conversation.
Yeah, it'll be great. I'm really excited. I already had a great schmooze in our meet and greet. So, it's got to live up to expectations, because we already had a good chat before. So, but no, definitely will. And we'll be talking about your background, everything that led up to Local Grown Salads and beyond. But, we'll be focusing a lot on food. Surprise, surprise, Local Grown Salads, food. Talking about startups in general, and then kind of doing a deep dive on that, but also talking about technology, right? And how all these things kind of combine here in 5784, the 21st century, right? So a lot of good stuff to get into today. I'm excited about it. I guess before we get into the meat and potatoes, I'd like to start off easy. Let our listeners know where you're based out of today.
Today I'm sitting in Toronto.
Toronto, very good. Toronto, I love Toronto. I got a lot of friends in Toronto. I was very scared of Canadians at first because I thought they were like genuine. I couldn't understand. They were so nice. I was like, people that sometimes come off as fake, but until I met Canadians, I'm like, they are actually genuinely like sweetheart people. Maybe you have a different opinion, but that's been my experience so far.
Yeah, Canadians are nice. In Canada, when you want to insult somebody, you tell them they're not being fair. You say, you're not being fair.
That's hurtful.
Yeah, that's really hurtful. You're just not being fair. The government isn't being fair. And, and all of a sudden, oh, no, really, I am. Blah, 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 blah.
I love it. That's the way to get people riled up. I'm glad that you told me that, because now whenever, I like messing around with people sometimes. So now next time I'm talking to my buddy Andrew Geller from Toronto or my friend Sharon from Montreal, I'll be like, you're not being fair, Sharon. I'm sorry. Not being fair. I love that. Well, cool. So tell me, right? So here you are, president of Local Grown Salads. So let's talk about your kind of background and entrepreneurship a little bit and kind of what's led up here to Local Grown Salads.
Okay, so maybe we should just tell everybody what Local Grown Salads is.
Please.
So that they get.
Exactly.
Okay, so we are a company that has technology for indoor vertical farming. We grow vegetables inside a building. So you think of a warehouse, and we grow the vegetables in there. And people who are familiar with indoor vertical farming, there's two types of models. There's the vertical one where you're actually vertical, it looks like a wall of vegetables. And the other one, which is bunk beds. Bunk beds we don't do. We do straight up vertical towers. So it's like a wall of vegetables. And the question that people say, well, where's the light come from? The light comes from LEDs. So the idea is that we can be in the middle of the Arctic and we can be having fresh basil, or we can be in the middle of the Sahara Desert and you can be having fresh vegetables.
As long as you have the power source nearby.
Well, if you have, but we also have a design where we actually build and we use solar to actually drive the system as well.
It's amazing.
So it could be anywhere. I was talking to an engineer yesterday from one of the universities, and this is the future of food in a lot of ways. It makes sense. And we want to talk about business, so I'm just going to jump into the business part of it.
Yeah, definitely.
The technology doesn't make sense everywhere. It doesn't make sense in Israel, which has a very good climate. It's a small country, and it's a dense country, meaning that you can grow things all year round in a greenhouse. So when I talk about growing, we're talking about, peas, beans, tomatoes, cucumbers, where all the herbs and, all the leafy greens, so and microgreens. Let's go over that. We'll go over that a little bit more in detail. But a country like Israel, where you're, from one end to the other, you've got a 3-hour transportation and you have this nice weather all year round, indoor vertical farming makes virtually no sense. Maybe some of our technology could be used outside or could be used in a greenhouse, but generally doesn't make a lot of economic sense or business sense. You take a country like the United States, which is, vast, and the core of the United States, the products that we're talking about are all grown in California, Arizona, and Mexico. And they're shipped across the country. So since we're talking Americans, we're talking 1,500 miles. For the rest of the world, we're talking around 2,000 kilometers. So food gets transferred along. You have a density problem. So in 420 miles, which is roughly the length of Israel, which is from Washington to Boston, you have 55 million people. Compare that against Israel, including everybody, in the same space, you got, 7-8 million people, right? So when you think about food and this is really where I want to come to, is you think about the food and the transfer of food, that's what's happening. So, the United States is really United States. As a country, it's really a bunch of little countries that came together under one federal government. I don't want to get into the politics of it, but essentially every state is a unique country. So you're essentially New York State, Michigan, let's go the big ones. New York State, Michigan, Pennsylvania are all importing from the state of California or the state of Mexico or Arizona. So food moves, which means that movement of the food is very expensive. So when somebody in New York City or Philadelphia or Chicago or Detroit goes and buys a pound of peppers or a pound of basil or whatever they're buying, more than 50% of the cost of that is just the fact that they're transporting it from across the country and they're moving it. So it's the transportation cost. There's anywhere from 10 to 30% loss of product because the cold chain wasn't maintained, the truck got stopped, things fell off the back of it. Whatever happens, there's a huge loss of it. So, and that's why, 50% of the cost is just there. And then you have, the retailer has to get their margin, and then, all the middle people have to get it. And then the product itself is old. Now, this same story happens in Germany. So from Morocco, the fact is that if it doesn't rain in Spain, people in Germany don't have food, don't have fresh vegetables. England, all of the northern countries. Understanding the business really has to understand geography, has to understand food supply chain, and has to understand everything. So that's kind of in a nutshell what my business is all about. And then, of course, the technology of growing inside, which is a whole separate conversation we can get into, and growing vegetables.
It's interesting, right? Because, you talk about the density, it seems to be a lot more dense when you're living in Tel Aviv and you're living in Jerusalem, as opposed to, when you're driving up and down the country and you see those greenhouses you're speaking of, right? But there's such a big movement now to kind of grow your own food. And is this kind of like meant for kind of bigger grows and big warehouses, or is this something, whatever, somebody can just grow in their house and have their own kind of stuff and just for personal use or for their own community or anything like that?
Okay, my local grown salad technology is commercial growing. It's intended to service commercial, large scale, the big companies, millions of pounds a year. Mm-hmm. My technology would make no sense for you to have it in your house by itself.
Copy that.
There are other people who do indoor vertical farming that is suitable for your home. My daughter, for example, set up a little farm in her condo in Toronto and was getting fresh vegetables all weekend long. Yeah. She went to Home Depot, bought a shelving unit, went to Amazon, bought some lights, hooked everything up, put everything on a timer, and boom, she was having fresh vegetables growing in her house. And it was enough for her husband, her, and at the time, one child. And then, so it worked great that way. So so the technology ranges from anywhere like what I'm doing to the smallest thing. Think about the internal combustion engine, right? You can put an internal combustion engine on one of those little Honda motorcycles, the little tiny ones, right? And you can put it into a train at one point, and a diesel engine, and you're pulling a train. So the technology isn't itself deriving what you're using for. It's the company and whose technology you're using and what the end market is. So very, very, very wide range.
Yeah, I mean, I have a different, unique perspective, right? Because even though this are probably our 4th or 5th episode that's coming out now here in Mamish Mavericks, thanks everybody for listening wherever you are, right? Been doing dang discussions for 4 or 5 years, and they're talking about, how much we talked about cannabis grow. So I can kind of picture, right, those big commercial grows, And okay, like you can have your little grow here in your house and wherever else, but that's not what you're building. That's not what you're building out, right? You're building out those gigantic grows, those commercial grows, millions of pounds you mentioned. So I mean that's fantastic, right?
I want to make a big difference between cannabis and what we do, because that conversation comes up a lot.
Yeah.
And well, why don't I grow cannabis? So first of all, there's a big difference between cannabis and fresh vegetables. The fact that they're both grown is in common, but when you sell cannabis, you always sell it dried. You don't need freshness. There is no shelf. Well, there is a shelf life probably. I don't really know cannabis well, but the shelf life isn't days. The shelf life is probably mentioned in weeks, months, right? So somebody grows it, they harvest it, they dry it out, and then it could sit in the retailer shop.
You can process it and do all kinds of other stuff with it as well. All kinds of other products.
Well, we have that same thing. You can still get, we process basil. We get, there's a lot of processing that goes involved. But my point is that freshness is critical to my business and is not to cannabis. The second thing is that cannabis has you really want the flower of the plant. You don't want the actual plant itself. So when you eat celery, you're actually eating the plant. When you eat basil, you're actually eating the plant itself. You're eating the leaves. In marijuana, it's usually that flowering thing that you do. The other thing comparable, I like talking about cannabis compared to what we're doing. Not that to support cannabis, but it's just such an interesting comparison. In cannabis, you care about CBD or THC, right? That's kind of your measure of it. In our world, basil, I care about the nutrient. I care about different things. I care about what it looks like. So, for example, if I have this all comes back to my business and understanding my business, right?
Yeah, no, definitely.
So the basil, right? If you use let's just think basil, because basil is a nice product to think about. You can put basil on top of a pizza. So you have a giant basil leaf on top of a pizza. So you want it to look good, and you also want taste. But the look is also very important. However, we crunch it up and you put a little oil into it, a pesto, right? You don't really care what it looks like. You care about the flavor. But if I take that same basil leaf and then I want to put it into a drink, and I care about and it's an energy drink, I don't care what it looks like. I don't care what it tastes like, but I care about this nutritional density of the product. And that's why it becomes a different product. So the same basil can be seen 3 different ways and needs to be grown 3 different ways, depending on who your customer is and how you're growing it. And basil, like wine, you can take a Shiraz grape. A Shiraz grape can be grown in Niagara Falls in Canada, and you can use the same grape and grow it in California, or you can grow it in Australia, or you can grow it in Chile. And the same grape grown in different places will give a different flavor to the wine. So which also affects my business, how I do my business. I assume that the same kind of thing happens in cannabis. How you grow a particular seed, we'll get a different result. But maybe it seems to me in that industry, the particular seed that you're using makes a bigger difference than the grow environment they use.
Well, they all play a big thing. I mean, wow. It's like, they say about the guy who was a shoemaker and all day was talking about the shoe. And then they said, I know a guy who put a shoe on his feet. I never knew a guy who could put a shoe on his head. And with cannabis, there's so much there that you can get into the environment and the lights but that's why I say I feel like there is a little bit of the look and everything. There is some stuff there, but like you said, the freshness is the main thing, right? I'm amazed with some of the stuff that we import in Israel, or you see imported, and you wonder how the heck freaking California avocados got across and all these kind of things, right? But with local grown salads, since it's commercial, what is kind of like your demographic? Who is it exactly that you're looking into?
It's just regular people. That's a very good question you've asked. So the industry has a couple of different types of players in the industry. I, as an industry player, I price my products when it comes out of the farm the exact same thing if it came from California. So I have a competitive advantage. I have no pesticides, fungicides, herbicides. I have no pesticides, no fungicides, no herbicides. My price is the same as something that came from California. I have a better product, a better tasting product, everything else. And I'm able to sell my product at that price. Other people in my marketplace, because their technology isn't as great as mine, of course, and they're not nearly as good looking as I am, they have to price the price.
Come on.
They have to price their stuff much higher. So historically, indoor vertical farming is the products are seen as a higher price product. So when you walk into your Safeway, you see we haven't even talked about how the product to market, but you'll see indoor vertical farming stuff to be much higher priced because there's no pesticides, no fungicides, no herbicides. as a higher price than the stuff that's from non-stuff. I'm not going to market that way. We're going to market with volume, and we're going to market with the same pricing perspective. So back to your core question of the demographic, our demographic is everybody. But don't necessarily look at demographics as critical to us. We look at the distribution chain as opposed to the supply chain. Supply chain is coming into me, distribution is going out. So we look to who our local distributors are. Don't think Israel. You can't really think Israel because they say it's really not a good market for us. You have to think something like New York City, or you have to think Chicago, any
Urban
large city.
Large, gigantic. You think of, I don't know, not everybody watches movies, but, like The Matrix, where they've already scorched the sun and everything's covered. And,
Okay. Okay. I like to just think about New York, Chicago in February.
Let's not go
right?
there. Yeah, exactly.
Right. So think Chicago in February. So everything's got, all that fresh food has to be imported because you can't grow anything in Chicago because it's too cold, right? Some greenhouses may operate, but they don't operate well. So we grow it locally. It's better if I do a slightly comparison. Typically what will happen is the growers in California, Arizona, and Mexico will package the stuff. They'll grow it. They'll put it onto a truck. The truck will go to a central distribution center. Central distribution center will be sold to local last mile distributors who will bring it to your Safeway, and Susie buys her product, or Sarah will buy her product at Safeway, right? What we do is we sell directly to the distributor, the local last mile distributor. So there's none of that shipping. The last mile distributor then does the distribution, and they'll sell it. The two big markets are retail and food service. So food services are all the restaurants, but it can also be hotels. It can also be commissaries in an army base. It could be a hospital. It could be any place that's a general place. And then retail, you have the retailers, but then you have your Safeways, and then you have your bodegas, and you have all your specialty locations, that buy it out. So we really think of the distribution chain. We don't really think of the demographic. When it comes to demographics, there is some thinking, what do you grow? So people from Asia, they like a thing called mustard greens. Also, African Americans love this thing called mustard greens. You typically won't see a mustard green in a Ashkenazi meal or even a Sephardi meal unless they come from one of these places. Right, so mustard green, I happen to love mustard greens, but it tastes a lot like horseradish, right? So it's very, very sharp flavor. Basil is, very Italian, but now with everything going on, and people tend to eat a lot of other stuff. But you also have that kind of demographic. So which vegetable you're going to buy. And then, of course, there's I hate cilantro or I love cilantro.
Oh, it's the
people.
best.
Like people.
I'm Mexican Ashkenazi.
Oh, you're in love with
Mexican Ashkenazi. So you got to get, some people taste like soap, but it's
right.
needed ingredient.
So,
wow.
Well, yeah. So, but that there are two types of people in the world: those that love cilantro and those that hate it. Nobody is neutral about cilantro. I don't know why. I just a fact of life. You can Google it. There are whole websites dedicated to.
I think also it pertains to gefilte fish, rain. There's a few things on this category. I don't know.
No, not like cilantro. Cilantro doesn't even matter if you're Jewish or not Jewish. It doesn't matter who you are. You either love it or hate it. Anyway.
There's so much here to it, obviously, and the technology that goes behind it. Is this something that's really accessible now, and where do you go from here in terms of the next step, and what do we need next, and oh man, if only we had this and only we had that?
We've been working on the technology for almost 7, 8 years already. Actually, it might be getting close to 10 years at some point. I don't like to think about it. It's taken a long time to develop the technology. I actually started with not LED lights. I started with fluorescent lights. My first grow was done with fluorescent lights, and there's wood structures and everything else. We're now trying to roll out 200 indoor vertical farms. So we figure that, just give context, that will generate roughly $1 billion in revenue a year with the 200 farms. And that won't even touch the marketplace. I like to always use, people in their mind understand Washington to Boston. So I always use Washington to Boston. Everybody can understand that I-95 going up through Philadelphia, through Newark, up through the New Jersey, and then to New York, and then around to Boston. So that's 55 million people. That market at the wholesale level is an $11 billion market in fresh vegetables every single year.
Wow.
Right? if you think about my 200 farms, that will get me, if every one of those 200 farms were in that density, that would be less than 10% of the market.
Wow.
Right? The market is massive. Give you another example. We were talking to a pickle manufacturer. There's a guy up in New York State that wants pickles. He wants 40,000 pounds of cucumbers a week. And he considers himself a small pickle manufacturer, right? So you can imagine when you do those kinds of cucumbers, you're not going to get your high margins, your very, very low margins, but you do less volume. So think of the Walmart model there versus the basil model, which is a higher value product, or microgreens, which is even a greater value. I think in terms of the product, how much profitability it is, the volumes I have, those kinds of things. So I don't know if that answers your question directly or if it was where you wanted to go, but
No, it does kind of. I guess, what I was meaning is, I'm sure you have a vision. You've been working on this technology for 8 years. I think sometimes we're able to see the market kind of transpire before it happens, or you can see where we need to go, right? And seeing what is my holdup, what's my main pain point.
we're a capital intensive industry.
Oh.
Every one of those farms that I talked about are, $3 to $5 million of cash. So it's a very capital intensive industry. It's not like software where, you spend some money and then, your cost of the next version of it is very low, right? We're like a car company, right? The more car, you need a lot of money to build. I think Tesla's factory cost them $1 billion, right? Every factory is $1 billion. Right? Once you put the capital in, the machine just pops out income on a regular basis, but it's a very capital intense business. That's why I'm looking for the 200 farms. But the vision, I want to be very clear, the vision is 200 farms. I got the cities listed out where I want to deliver the farms, where I want to grow the farm, where I want to put the farms, how much it costs, what kind of buildings we have. We've designed buildings where they're not pop-ups, but they're prefab buildings. So you've probably seen those prefab buildings. One day there's no building, next day there's a building. That's kind of our thing. Embedded solar in there, which makes sense in the southern climates, but doesn't make sense in Calgary or places like that, unless there's a change in the financing. But yeah, my vision is very, very, very sharp, very clear. It's the 200 farms. I even know what the farms are going to look like. I know what they're going to produce. I know how I'm going to go to the market. I know who I'm going to sell them to. I know how to find the local distributors. I know how to bring them on as customers. Ultimately, my ultimate goal is to sell to McDonald's. I have built the entire technology and everything else to allow me to service the 35,000 McDonald's around the world, so that I can give them an arugula or a basil in Japan that'll taste exactly as the same arugula and basil that will be in Yerushalayim, that will be in Tel Aviv, that'll be at the airport.
Is it still Golden State Food that still delivers to McDonald's, or is that too old already? My dad used to own McDonald's back in the day, so I remember Golden State Foods, like you were saying, like you're gonna get the same tasting lettuce in Argentina as you're going to get in California, as you're going to get in...
Exactly. So McDonald's, I think, has a bunch of suppliers, and, depending on what they're supplying, buns, McDonald's as a corporation is a very great company to look at and to see their model. Unlike other big franchises, they do not own the suppliers to their franchisees, because they want to be able to negotiate best prices and whatever. So there's no concept of interference between that and them. So they'll go to a bun manufacturer and say, this is the bun you got to deliver, this is the price you got to deliver, and then guy gets to do the buns.
They don't own the manufacturers, but they own the real estate. That's what made McDonald's so great, right? And my dad used to own McDonald's. Yeah. He said, he was had the number one McDonald's in Mexico City at one point, and number 3 that wasn't franchisee owned. Number 1 franchisee owned, number 3 in the country. Anyways, he went up to the head dude and over there in Mexico. He's like, "You guys aren't we're not in the hamburger business. You guys are in the real estate business." And he's like, "What do you mean by that?" It's like, "No, I'm not. It's a genius thing what you guys are doing. It's not stupid." But yeah, I guess that's kind of the thing. But with farms, right? You're not owning the farms, right? You're providing the technology the 200 farms,
Well,
right?
we actually have a bunch of business models. In some cases, I'm working with a number of business partners. So it's, we can go after the simplest model is, you can buy our technology, you can run the farm and use your own brand, right? So you just buy our technology and you're up and running, you're going. Number two is that you can be licensed as a local grown salad, which means that if I say that you got to put the nutrition in on Tuesday, you got to put it on Tuesday or you lose your license. That's how I guarantee that McDonald's is going to get the same basil every single day. You got to follow my rules. Exactly. But the other thing is you can just run it as on Mush Farms, right? And you can use our technology, follow our rules, use our rules as suggestions, say, you know what, I can save myself a few bucks and put my nutrition in on Wednesday. My customers don't care. The second model is that we're going to own our own farms, obviously. We're going to own the real estate. From a real estate perspective, not every place makes sense to own the real estate. So, for example, in Toronto, if I want to buy a 20,000 square foot building, it's going to cost me $500 to $800 a square foot in Toronto. So I can buy it, but my ROI on my building, I can't charge myself enough rent to make money, right? However, if I go to Windsor, Ontario, I can buy a property for $133 a square foot. All of a sudden, I can make some rent. I can make ROI on my property. The other option, of course, is I talked about these prefab buildings, right? Where you put together, we buy a piece of land, you put the prefab in, boom, boom, boom. Again, depending on the price of the property, some places it makes no sense. Some places it's a brilliant idea. So we have an entire range of business models that we're playing with and dealing with. In the end, I want to get the farms out there. The more farms I have out there, the quicker I'm going to be to capture the McDonald's, the Costco's, the Starbucks, the Taco Bell, the Chipotle, Panera Bread, and you can go list of the retailer, the food service guys, and then I can go through the list of retailers, right? Costco, Walmart. Walmart invested in one of the other indoor vertical farming companies called Plenty. They've just put $400 million into it a couple of years ago. But Plenty has technical challenges versus us. Our systems can be dropped and installed in 3 months. Walmart takes 2-3 years before they can, or not Walmart, Plenty takes 2 to 3 years before it can install a full system. We're talking to a company right now in the UAE where it's a $25 million install. They want to do it underground. So the engineering company is going to dig a big hole, put 2 levels under, and then we'll be underground. There's no reason for us to be above ground, right? Might as well be underground. Underground also gives you a lot of advantages because you don't have to cool the building because the ground acts as an insulator. So it's just a very cool idea.
That's
so yeah, this is. Yeah, well, these guys are doing it right now. I mean, this project is.
What I mean. But we live in the future, so it makes sense, and that's the whole thing, right? We're talking about the future, talking about the vision and how that plays out, right? But it all goes back to that beginning, that startup, right? Talk to me about startups and the importance of that, and kind of how it plays into Zale overall, I guess.
Okay. So there's a book from the 80s that was very, very big, was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People.
Yep,
right?
Yep.
We're Jewish and religious, and this guy happened to be not Jewish and happened to be religious. So there's a lot of stuff that you can see from his view of the world, the chacham that comes from the outside. Rambam talks about that. But one of his habits is incredibly important, and that one is start with the end in mind. You've got to start with the end in mind, because if you got the end in mind, everything you're going to do is going to get you is either taking you closer to that or taking you away. So let me give you an example.
I said that's how Hashem created Shabbos, right? Sof Maaseh B'Amar Shabtichila, right? It's you start off with the end, and then we'll get back. We'll reverse engineer.
Well, he actually, back to the 7 Habits, he talks about that you have to start and sharpen the saw. And you have to take a day off, 1 day a week, and he calls it sharpening the saw. We call it sharps. Anyway, but no, the point I want to make is, if you start with the end in mind, I always wanted to service McDonald's. My goal was to produce product that would meet McDonald's needs. Everything I built was built around to allow me to service McDonald's. So McDonald's wants consistency. McDonald's wants an incredibly high level of food safety. McDonald's wants a wide variety of production. It wants to be able to have local production everywhere it can. Every one of these things fit into the building I built. So I had to be able to figure out, We didn't talk at all about the technology, but the technology has a wide range of product. I can grow microgreens, herbs, leafy greens, and small vegetables. Small vegetables are peas, beans, not carrot. I don't do carrots. I don't do root vegetables. But all of these things.
No trees, obviously, right?
No trees, yeah.
No, nothing
But
above the
everything
ground,
that-
nothing above the ground, Jim, right? Like
Exactly. Anything that goes in a salad. That's why we're local grown salad. So all of these things are part of a salad. And all of these products are products that McDonald's would want in their things. So I had to have a wide range of products so that they can come to me for everything. And then I needed the consistency. So our technology is actually two parts. There's the growing technology, and just as critical is a software technology that operates the entire thing from seed to the plate. I remember I mentioned earlier, one of the things I mentioned was the food safety. Food safety is incredibly important to McDonald's. Of all the major guys, I don't think McDonald's has ever had a food recall. But Chipotle almost went under because of Taco Bell's had problems. Everybody's had problems. McDonald's doesn't. McDonald's, I'll give you an example. If you're a franchisee at McDonald's and you run out of tomatoes, you can't run across the street to Safeway and buy tomatoes and bring them in and chop them up. If you do that, you will not be a McDonald's franchisee the next day.
Yep.
Right? You can't. You're better off not to sell your hamburgers without tomatoes than to do that. Because they don't know what's happening with that tomato and the history of the tomato, and they can't track that tomato back. So again, if you think about back to your question, as a startup, I started with that end in mind, and then I had to work through. You have to work through the financial. You have to work through the supply chain. You have to work through the distribution chain. You have to be able to understand who your customers are, what your customer wants. Remember, I talked about the distributor and then the retailer and the food service. So that is the distribution chain. I need to know what the distributors need, what turns them on, what's important to them. Then there's the retailers. What do they care? Whole Foods has a different desire and demand than Safeway does, right? Safeway wants product, wants pricing, right? McDonald's, but the arugula example I give, right? I tossed it out there, but the reality is Chipotle, Taco Bell, and McDonald's will want a different arugula. Their flavor profile for the arugula will be totally different because of who they're servicing as customers. So as part of your startup, you need to really think through everything. Your supply chain coming up, your distribution chain coming down, where the money goes, how the money gets transferred, what are the unique economics? How much is it going to cost me to sell a pound of arugula, right? What's involved? Well, there's the packaging, there's the touching of it, there's how I'm going to grow it, there's my capital costs, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I'll give you a practical example. Our capital cost to grow vegetables is incredibly low, because we've designed our systems so that we have a very low capital cost. Our competition, Plenty, has an incredibly high capital cost. Another one that just went under, Aero Farms, had an incredibly high capital cost. Okay, so you think, well, capital cost is a one-time spend. The reality is it's not. If I spend $1 million in capital costs, and I want to, and it's going to take me 5 years, that $1 million has to be divided among over 5 years, so it's $200,000 a year, and that $200,000 has to be paid for on every single one of the products I sell. And so if I sell one car, it's going to cost, it's got $200,000 just to cover my capital cost. Sell 2 cars, okay, it's $500,000. It's $100,000 a car. If I sell 200,000 cars, it's $1 a car. Those capital costs are incredibly important. But a lot of entrepreneurs don't think about that. That's what makes it different than, say, the software industry. Software industry, you throw it in, but then you do $1 million, production is nothing, or one guy clicks and joins. There's no cost, there's virtual cost. In the software business or in your business,
VCs who are just throwing in $1 million, just endless runway. You don't have to make money for the first 5-10 years.
Oh,
You'll be valued as $1 billion company, and you don't even have to make any money. You don't even have to turn a profit for the first 5-10 years. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's gone. That's gone. That's not how VC operates anymore.
No more Ubers anymore. No more nothing like that anymore.
Those guys
WeWorks.
Just gay.
Yeah. We see what happened. We see what happened with all those.
So back to the startup thing. This is all the things that somebody in a startup has to think through. And the other thing you have to think through is how you're going to be a billion-dollar company, especially if you're raising money. Now, when you go in the startup world, there are guys who just want to start up and have their retail store at the corner, and they're happy to do that. But then there's the other guy who says, well, I want this type of store to be everywhere, so I'm thinking through my franchise model. How am I going to franchise it? How am I going to build out? And how am I going to have 20 or 30 of these guys? As many companies as there are stories. I'm a big podcast listener too. There's a thing called Business Wars. And they went through kind of the history just recently of Chipotle versus Taco Bell, and the Taco Bell story and the Chipotle story. Very, very fascinating. Two totally different companies, totally different trajectories and stories of how they got there. Just fascinating. But you can learn from every single one of them, right?
Yeah.
And you can't duplicate what they're doing because they're unique individuals running the show, guy driving the bus, very unique visions of what they want. Well, what is common with every single one of them is they have a vision. They have, where do you want to be at the end of the day? Like, what is your big vision at the end of the day? And if your vision is too small, people aren't going to be interested in it, and you're going to fail, and you're going to give up. I mean, I've been at this for a long time, and I have lots of failures on my back, right? And I'm still banging it out, right? And I know I'm going to get there because I have a good vision. It's a true vision. The market's there. The industry went up and went down. It's in a downturn. Now it's in an upturn again. People are funding companies again.
It's amazing. And I think that's that cycle. Obviously, it's nothing new. And that's kind of what goes into as well, being an entrepreneur, having to weather those storms and anticipating those storms and the ups and downs. And that's what really, I think, the main trait a business owner, entrepreneur has to have is that pain tolerance, that ability, that resilience to keep going and just be like, you're crazy, man. Like, what do you mean? I'm going to keep going. This is my life. And that's really, I think, what separates the people who make in the end and the ones who are like, oh, there was.
I think we're just sick. I think, honestly,
people don't understand it.
Definitely.
There's something wired differently in our head. There's no doubt about it. There's no doubt. We're like, you're insane. Go 9 to 5, go clock in and out. And for me, that was just never even an option. There was just not ever.
I tried it a couple of times in my career, and some days I wake up wishing I was, like I like to say, normal, right? Like I just kind of wish I was kind of normal.
By the end of that day, you'd be bored out of your mind and be like, man, we could be doing this so much better. I can't believe they're doing it like this. They should be doing like this and this and this.
That's exactly what happened. No, I was a total failure at that kind of stuff. I'm a very talented guy. God gave me lots and lots of blessings. But one kind of thing I'm missing is that ability just to be happy with a job, take home a salary, and do a good job. All the other skills I had, anyways. But it is what it is. I am who I am, and I have to live. But it's painful for the people around you as well.
For sure.
And you got to be aware of that. If you really have the bug and you really have it, you have it. And make sure, I strongly recommend that you make sure that your spouse is on board with it from day one, and that as a person you recognize that you have that problem. That's, I don't know if I call it a problem, but whatever, you have that thing, and you need to make sure that the people around you know that you have that thing.
Sure, I'm sure you had that as a kid. I'm sure you always had that, right? Hustling, and I was making like mixtapes and saw those in recess and stuff like that as a kid, and I see kids in town. You're off there, we're talking about mentorship and how important mentorship is to you. It's so important to me to have mentors. That's the only place I've gone here, and to have people that I'm mentoring, and you got kids that same thing. And I'm so grateful, right? My wife, talk about being on board. Sometimes she's the one that's telling me like, Maynard, what are you even worried about? What are you even for a moment? Hashem's going to always turning around. Everything's always working out. That. And I'm like, you're right, and she's got the same kind of spirit. But my dad gets it. My parents get it, but it drives her parents. And it works for them, and that's great. And good for them, I don't know what the heck I'd be doing in the same situation. But I guess that plays into as well who we are and how we're wired and what we're trying to get out and our journey and how that all plays together. Obviously, right, Mamish Mavericks, this is a Jewish podcast with Jewish entrepreneurs, right? So we didn't really get into so much, but I want to hear from you at least how local grown salads plays into your identity as a Yid and kind of your values and how they kind of line up. And I think that's kind of like the main point here, the main bow that we're trying to tie up here with.
Okay, so it is totally intertwined, my Jewishness, like being Jewish. As we talked about in our intro, I'm a big believer, a big reader of Victor Miller, right? Victor Miller. I love a Victor Miller. I discovered him just a few years ago, really about halfway through this local grown salads journey. And I realized through him, and you read his stuff is all science, right? He's a big science guy. And to him, science is just Kodesh Baruch Hu, right? It's Kodesh Baruch Hu's way of running the world, right? Gravity is just something Kodesh Baruch Hu created so that the world will run. So when you look at how plants are built, and in a lot of the science I learned about plants, I have a degree in computer science. So my degree is computer science, kind of an engineering type degree, especially when I did it. And then you got to go into the science of how plants grow. And a lot of it I learned from a Victor Miller, surprisingly, learning his stuff. The other part that became very useful is learning all the Mishnayos, right? How the Mishnayos breaks down a problem and how things fit together, and the way Chazal have broken up all most people, I don't know what most people are, but people who do Daf Yomi, majority of the world is doing Daf Yomi. They skip Zerayim. Zerayim is, but everything is in there. Everything you need to know about running a vegetable and running farms and how farms run and the economics of farms, and everything is sitting there in the Mishnayos, right?
Yeah.
So every time I'm learning a Mishnah, and I'm trying, especially in the Zerayim section, you start to think about, well, what does this apply to me, right? Do you have to take ties? So let's use the English word. Do you have to take ties from the stuff that we grow? And what's the bracha on a tomato that's grown in our system? So many of the indoor vertical farming systems are hydroponic.
That's interesting. That's very interesting.
But my system is soil, right? But
Right.
So in hydroponic, it turns out that the halacha is, as normally understood, is it looks like a tomato, tastes like a tomato. You make a hadama on it. You don't make a circle, right? However, my system is in soil, right? And then you have the problem of what do you do during Shemitah year, right? So Shemitah, our stuff is grown, but our stuff doesn't touch the ground, and there's no holes in the bottom. So all of our stuff becomes all of these questions start to. You think they're just a halakha question, but they're actually very practical questions. And you're saying, okay, well, if I want to make my stuff grow in Israel and I want to hit the market, and how do I make sure that I'm within the halakha? But the halakha will drive the technology, which will drive the market. And then when you think about that part, it affects how you're doing all the other stuff that you do. All of this stuff interacts, and you see how it all interacts. Then there's a whole morality part of it, that you're creating jobs for people, you're giving people good employment. What are they allowed to eat while they're harvesting, right? So, they're doing strawberries. Are they allowed to eat their strawberries or their peas or the beans? And, are they allowed? Can we stop them? Should we stop them? And then you have health issues, and anyways, it just goes on and on and on. So it's
no, that's absolutely fascinating. That's absolutely fascinating to me. Like, that's incredible, because we talk about the times of Moshiach and what does it mean that eat Hazer and all these kind of questions that we can't even fathom how they make sense, and these kind of things. And not that they necessarily it's so that, right? But it's it's just things that we would have never had to think about, but it was all there in the Torah from the beginning, and there from how to pull it out. And it was like they didn't have microwaves, but still Moshe Rabbeinu, they're able to draw out and pull out how to kosher and microwave. And it's really incredible how it shows the depth of everything.
Well, I'm a very practical guy. So right now I happen to be learning Shkalim, the Mishnayos of Shkalim. And when you go through, Shkalim is the only one from the Yerushalmi Talmud that you actually learned during Daf Yomi, right? And I think people skip through it. I do when I was doing Daf Yomi, I remember doing it, and I don't remember learning anything. But now I'm doing the Mishnayos in sort of a kind of a little bit of depth. And you discover how the actual Beis HaMikdash operated, right? And the business of you have to actually think of the business of the Beis HaMikdash. You're running a production factory here, right? If you think of it as a factory, you're bringing in this carbonas that are bringing in by each person. You have to chop up the carbonas. You have to cook it essentially on the Beis HaMikdash. I mean, people get little upset sometimes the way I talk about this stuff, but it's really a production system, right? You have all these people that are working there. You have all the money that's paying for it. You have all of these little boxes where the money's got to come in. What happens if the money falls? And then who runs the money, and how do you spend it, and where can you spend it, and how do you? But if you look at the Mishnayos from a business for let's call them especially, it's just very, very powerful. What if you look at it as the Beis HaMikdash is this business, and it operates like a business? And they one thing, just as a little Devar Torah, one of the things that have the Beis HaMikdash, when you want to do bring your korban, and your korban was a nadava, it was a gift. You could bring the korban, but like any other place, like we go shopping, if you don't bring your plastic bag, you can buy a plastic bag. Well, the Beis HaMikdash would sell you the animal. Okay, so you would pay, your 100, whatever you would pay, some number, 100 units for your thing, but it would only cost the Beis HaMikdash 80 units. So the Beis HaMikdash would actually make profit on everything they sold. What do they do with the profit? How can they use the profit? Where can they use the profit? They are a not-for-profit organization.
I love it. This is why we tie it in. Like, this is the values. This is, once again, right? This is how we should be, I think, looking at things, right? Is how do we turn the mundane holy, right? How can we take this, this job, this business, and how can we elevate it? This is going to be the main thing. The first question that we get asked when we go to Shemaim is going to be, I guess the translation is, did you do business with faith, right? B'emunah, right? With a different way, faithfully, or in the good way, whatever. But really, it's how are we elevating our day-to-day life? Are we living with, according to the values and integrity and the ways of Torah, instead of, just like going about it and having this like section of my life, and then, okay, no, over here I'm holy. Over here, don't look at that part, don't look at that. This is how it is supposed to be, and it's the opposite, this is how we're doing it. So that's why I'm fascinated. This is an incredible way to talk about it.
You could do a whole series on Demai.
No doubt about it.
Demai is like, I'm a poor farmer, and then anyways. But
you can do a podcast, like a whole series on the Mishnayos and how they incorporate with your business specifically. I mean, I think it's fascinating, actually. It's pretty cool stuff. We talk about having that vision and having those 200 farms that you want to get on, and the different business models you have there. And I guess what's kind of your biggest obstacle that you're facing in terms of reaching those visions or getting
financing, finding the money to the people to buy into the vision. At the point I am right now, I know where my problems will be. Today's problem is financing. Tomorrow's problem will be staffing, right? And keeping and maintaining the staffing and running it, because this is incredible number of jobs that we're creating by doing this, right? So basically, we're taking people who are farming in California, and now we need to be farming in Chicago, in New York, right? So creating jobs, getting that up and running. And we want to, our goal is, back to that value system, we want to pay what's called living wage jobs. So these people who can earn enough money and have a proper life, and not McDonald's doesn't pay, it's on a minimum wage job. It's a living wage job, high value living wage job. So people without education can make a good living. So kind of part of our social responsibility. You touched on earlier the climate change. I'm a big believer in the UN SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. These are the kinds of things that we as the world have to do. I am a strong believer, people like say, well, back in the olden days, it was so much better. It's a load of crap. David and Melech didn't have flush toilet, right? The world is a better place. 120 years ago, the majority of children died before they were 12 years old. Now, if a child dies, it's a tragedy because it's so unusual. I mean, it happens, God forbid, but it's a very big tragedy now. Before it was, people had 10, 12 kids because they knew many of their children would die.
Yeah.
The world, I have glaucoma, right? So there's like a million things I can do to fix my glaucoma. 120 years ago, it wouldn't have happened. Before 60, 70 years ago, there was no penicillin, right? The common cold could kill you. The world is becoming a better place every single year. There are bad things that happen. There are things that aren't good. We're dealing with the monsters of Hamas, the evil of Hamas, right? But in general, the world as a whole is getting better, right? Overall, if you look year to year,